This is episode 20 with Dakin Parker.
Welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, the show that empowers you to become the hero of your life's journey. With your host, Brian Tier.
Hey guys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Quarter Life Comeback Podcast, episode 20 today, and I'm very excited to be speaking to none other than Dakin Parker. Now, Dakin is a former CA who left the corporate world to create a career which felt more in alignment with what he really wanted in his life. This led to a creative writing course and later the startup world. Skyping from his New York apartment, Dakin chatted to his family's domestic worker back home in South Africa, who expressed how she wished her daughter could clean his apartment one day. This really bothered Dakin as he realized that the girl could be anything she really wanted to be. As a lot of quarter lifers experience unhappiness in their careers, I decided to chat to Dakin about the startup space and whether or not it's a good alternative work option for you to explore. In this episode, you'll learn how to find a position you like within your current employer, the two vital components of venturing into the startup world, how to know if a lack of competition is a sign of opportunity or a lack of demand, who the startup world is best suited for and what traits you need to survive, and how a simple Skype call changed Dakin's life. As always, you can get all the links and resources we mentioned at the show notes, which will be at briantier.com/020. That's briantier.com/020. But for now, let's go hang out with Dakin. Welcome back, everyone, and a big welcome to today's guest. I'm speaking to Dakin Parker. Dakin, welcome to the Quarter Life Comeback.
Thanks, Brian. It's really good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. We connected via email after a very cool initiative you've got going, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. But I wonder if we could get started and you could share with the listeners a little bit about, who is Dakin Parker and your quarter life story.
Sure, absolutely. I'm a really big fan of your podcast. I love it when people acknowledge that, hey, this is not quite what I thought it was going to be, and let me take action to make it more what I think it should be. I mean, if we go back now to when I left school, I wanted to study architecture or art. There was no ways I was going to do business or accounting, but my parents told me that's what you will do. Because, the excuse, and I don't know how many of your listeners' parents have this mentality, but I think it is fairly prevailing in the South African context where parents say, study business because anything else you do, business might help you with that. And some of that is true. I mean, that's not necessarily an incorrect sentiment, but it's not enough to base a career on. Anyway, I did go and study accounts. I did become accounts. I got my CA, and then I went with PwC, who I did my articles with. I went overseas and spent 10 years in San Francisco and in New York. But I think that what's interesting is that, water always finds its level. I think that, yes, you can endure a corporate job for as long as you, as long as you decide to endure it until the kind of the pain of staying stuck does no longer exceed the pain of actually making a move. And so, there's a lot of discomfort in that. I haven't had a fixed salary now for 4 or 5 years. It becomes very difficult to budget monthly when you have no idea what the amount of money is that's going to be coming in. So, a corporate job, a salary, that suits people just fine. And I don't think we're advocating that people do, everybody now needs to leave the cubicle farm because, one person has had, been able to find themselves. But I just decided that it was enough for me. And in fact, what I did first was I decided I wanted to go and explore myself as a writer. And I'm a chartered accountant, but when I was traveling, I would send a lot of emails back home. I think this was even before the idea of a group email existed, certainly in a time when people were reading all of the emails. I think now people have a lot, lower tolerance for emails and certainly don't spend as much time reading them. But I was sending emails home, and then when I didn't send an email for a while, people said, wait, have you taken me off the list? Why am I not getting your travel notes? And so I thought, well, maybe there's something there. And I applied to a whole bunch of writing schools when I was living in New York. I got into a couple, and then basically took 2.5 years out of, I wouldn't even say it was a rat race. It was any race, really, just to go and explore myself as a writer. And that really started the rest of this process, which has now seen me back in South Africa with a startup. I don't know if it's entirely a tech startup, but it is certainly a startup. And for the last 5 years, not having earned a salary, but I've written a book, and I'm, trying to follow my dream as best I know how, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think there's so many directions I can go from there. I can definitely resonate with the parents thing. I've also come from quite a old school parenting. And, it was a real degree like engineering or accounting or whatever. And that is the route that I took. But I think a lot of people listening will resonate with that, not really knowing what they want to study and end up in something that they don't really want to do. And I really love the fact that, you had that feeling that you wanted to explore creative writing and you went for it, without maybe knowing where it would lead or what it would lead to. It's kind of like the Steve Jobs commencement speech, which I'm sure everyone has heard by now. But Dakin, so you found yourself like quite unhappy at work or not quite fulfilled. Went for the creative writing route, and then where did things go from there?
Yeah, and let me I keep going back to the story when I try to explain to people. When I moved overseas, the company that I moved with, they give you what I call the golden handcuff, which was a nice big bonus in dollars to move yourself over, but you have to then stay in that job for at least 18 months before, you can be relieved of having to pay back some of this relocation bonus. And I tell you, not a week went by without me counting down how many months I had left of this 18 months. That was the degree of unhappiness. There was a time in California's business world that things were difficult anyway. It was Sarbanes-Oxley and the results of all of the, the Enron WorldCom scandals. And so we were working insane hours. It wasn't a very fun time. And let's disabuse the notion that work has to always be fun.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't. It's called work for a reason. But I think that what's important is that there is some purpose, and there is also some vision. Like, what are you going to do with what you're doing now? And I believe in synchronicity. I believe in the universe. And it's strange because even though in those months when I was counting down the hours, literally, I learned so much in that time that has really stood me in good stead for what I'm doing now and for taking that leap of faith. So I think everything does happen for a reason. And if you can at least, start with that as a basic premise, then there aren't really mistakes. There's just taking the next right action with the information you have available.
Yeah, let me dive in there. So, also, again, I want to say I've always mentioned this, like, I'm in no way advocating like everyone quit their job and pursue the sunshine and roses. It never really turns out like that. And I actually now, even though that's what I did, I actually now recommend, like, if people have some sort of idea of what they want to do, like, find a way to explore that on the side.
Yes.
But I'd love to hear from you some tips you had. You said you had the golden handcuffs. I wonder if you have any tips for listeners if people are in a job that they're not happy with, like some tips for getting through that or for staying positive.
Yeah, I think that the thing I've always told folks that I work with or that are kind of my mentees, make a noise, put your hand up and say, you know what, this is not quite what I was hoping it would be. When I was an article clerk, I was assigned to one of the worst jobs in the office. It had a reputation for being just awful. And everybody just thought they had to grin and bear it because you get assigned to that, and that's what it is. And I actually I made an appointment to see the partner, and I said, listen, here are the reasons that I don't think I'm very well suited for this, and I'm better suited for something else. And so I made a noise, and actually one of the jobs that I really wanted to get off of, I got off of. And the other one, they said, I'm so sorry, you've made a good case, but we really need you in that position. And so, not all of your noises that you make are going to result in anything. But if you don't say something, nobody's ever going to know. the way I got out of those real long, painful months in San Francisco was when I had an interview with HR where they checked in with you. They said to you, so how are things going? And I think so often we think we just have to say, fine, things are good, things are okay. There's an expectation that you just grin and bear it. And in that meeting, I said, you know what? I'm having an awful time. I've got to be honest with you. I'm counting down the months. But instead of just coming with the problem statement, I had a couple of things lined up to say, when they asked, well, what would you like to do? I had a whole bunch of things that I wanted to suggest, including staying within the firm, but helping teach folks, because that was something that I found that I really enjoyed. I didn't like going out to audit clients and actually doing the audit, but I liked sharing my tips, my methodology, some of the things that had worked with me. I liked sharing with other people. I think on some level I'm a closet teacher, and that was really helpful. And they said, oh, okay, well, there is this group that does just that. Would you like to apply for the job? And I said, absolutely. So I think making a noise and also coming up with suggestions. When I decided I didn't like living in San Francisco that much and I really wanted to try New York, I didn't just go to my boss and say, hey, I would like to be transferred to New York. I looked at it from a business perspective, looked at it from his eyes and said, you know what? Every time you fly me to a training course, which almost always is on the East Coast of America, that's 6 hours flying time from San Francisco. Those flights are more expensive. It's my time that's being charged, but not really being productive. Why don't we move me to New York, where head office is, where all of the other trainers are? And I told that to my boss and they said, you know what? That makes complete sense. Put together a one-page business proposal, put some numbers around it to show. And they didn't only transfer me, they paid for my move as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So I think the key thing there is no one likes a complainer, but if you're actually proactive in it and you show them that you've thought about it from their side too, and some solutions and options, you're more likely to get at least part of what you want out of it.
Yeah. And it's also not going to be one big immediate change. Like going from client facing to a more internal role finally led me to wanting to do a master's part-time in adult learning. And finally that got me to New York. And, it's slowly, but slowly, it's like, what is the next thing that I need to do here? And I think that, the whole plan doesn't even need to exist in your mind. Although I think planning is a crucial part of this, having some kind of strategy, not just this cowboy, shooting randomly saying, oh, now I want to do this. And, oh, that bling over there looks interesting. Or, oh, I want to do this now. And, there is some thinking that needs to go into a strategy and communicating that.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for sharing that, Dakin.
Sure.
So I want to get into what we want to talk about in the meat of the interview here. And you mentioned finding yourself in a startup these days. And I think for a lot of people who are unhappy in their current work situation, coming up or sort of creating a startup, launching a startup is possibly something they've been thinking of. So I'd love to get your take on why you decided to go the startup route and what that process looked like.
Yes, absolutely. I think all of that startup space starts with an idea, right? And there is this terminology in writing, but I think it's also important here is sometimes you also have to kill your darlings, which means that, yes, I've got this great idea and oh my word, if I only had an app that could brush my hair for me at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, my life would be sorted. And so now you go and you create this app that'll brush your hair at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday, but nobody else needs to have their hair brushed at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. And so this is great for you, but there's no other commercial sense to it. And I think that that's the first thing that really deeply needs to be explored. It's great to have an idea. I mean, people have the ideas by the dozen. There's even methodologies for innovating ideas. The ideas are certainly not in short supply. And I know that we are in a time where it's all about making life convenient. So, yes, if I only had an app that would brush my hair on Tuesday at 6 p.m., my life would be so much more convenient. That's fantastic. But what does the environment look like for the take up of that too? Because here's the truth. Just because you build doesn't mean they will come.
Oh yeah.
And so, and that could be shocking to people because we can get so enamored with ourselves. We can be so kind of like, wow, this thing is best. And the more we talk about it, the more we're convinced that it really is going to be the new Uber or the new Facebook or whatever it is. And certainly that belief is what's powered me through many a dark night of the soul, where I've wondered and worried, does this have legs? Is it anything? And then you go back to the idea, you talk to people about it, and that gets you energy to carry on. But I think it really starts with making a very objective, honest assessment and appraisal of what it is your idea would achieve. And then I think part B of that is to do a deep, deep research of what is out there that may already be doing that. I think too often we feel because it hasn't been on my Facebook feed, or because nobody in my friendship circle is talking about it, it doesn't exist. And that's a myth. It is really, really hard to communicate something like an idea or a service to 100% of the population. You're just not going to do that. So I think part B of any kind of venture into the world of startup is to deeply look at who else is out there. What are they doing? What makes their service offering unique? And how are you going to be better at it than what they are?
Yeah, I want to go into a couple of things there. So in terms of having an idea, I imagine sort of having a mentor or a mastermind group or something like that you can bounce ideas off is quite valuable. And then sort of putting out a minimum viable product to see if there's demand. Would you say that that's quite a good idea if people are thinking of starting this?
100%. The very first thing I did, I had my idea, and we'll get into that in a minute, what the product is, but I was sitting in my flat in New York and I was Skyping home with my family. And the idea came to me in that Skype. But I'd been out of South Africa for 10 years. Legislation had changed. We've gotten the New Companies Act. Things were very, very different from when I was there. And so the first thing I did when I got home was I assembled an advisor board. And there were 7 people on it. And they were people that were smarter at things that were central to the product that I was. So it was my old high school headmaster, a friend of mine now who is the COO of Investec, people who knew about stocks and investing and trading more than I did. And I invited them to participate pro bono. So nobody got paid for anything, but it was a favor and it was an invitation to be part of something. But they were all friends, and they were friends that had done very impressive things with their lives, and friends who I really needed to listen to. And when they told me even silly things like this brand that you've chosen doesn't make sense, it can be so much better. Or, the way you've interpreted this piece of legislation is actually not accurate. This is how it's happening on the ground. Taking time to listen to that and not being defensive is really hard, actually, because it's your idea. You've birthed something.
It's your baby, right?
It's your baby. It's your baby. You wanted to have blue eyes, even though everybody else is telling you, no, brown eyes is the popular one this year, and I hope that doesn't make me sound like I'm designing babies. I'm not. But it is important to absolutely get certainly a mentor at least. But an advisor board was what I found really helpful to weigh in on things.
Yeah. And, something that I wanted to touch on the other point of, to seeing what's out there. I've often had like a couple of cool ideas that I thought might be good to pursue. But where do you draw the line between, if you find that the thing you think of creating doesn't exist or isn't currently on the market, is that an indication that it's a good idea to pursue because there's no competition? Or is it sometimes the case that there's no demand for it? That's why there's nothing on the market like that?
It's an excellent question. And I think that is something that everybody is going to be faced with answering. And I think it's different for different people. So my idea was education savings as an employee benefit. So that if you employed a domestic worker, you could help her save for the education of her kids by signing up with my product. And we took care of everything from investing the money, securing the money, and then paying the schools directly. So nothing exists like this in South Africa. There is a version of this available in the States, and certainly some of it is built into various things across Europe. But there was nothing in South Africa that was possible. And I went down a certain route. I worked with some attorneys that knew what they were doing. And we actually went to the Financial Services Board in Pretoria. We made a meeting. We met with the team manager in the one kind of group that we would be submitting our application to. We had all of our documents ready. We'd drawn up a trust deed and this application form. We sent it to them a week beforehand so they could read it and so that we could, be ready to answer any questions that they would have. We got to this meeting and the representative from the Financial Services Board just looked at us and said, "Gentlemen, you have the wrong animal." And I said, "Excuse me, what?" He said, "What you're trying to do is not possible. And it's certainly not possible in the way that you're trying to do it with us. So he basically said, it's dead in the water.
Not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Not going to happen." And that was a year and a half ago. That was probably the worst day of my professional career because I left that meeting being thoroughly deflated. And so I had to do a real thorough introspective kind of session with myself and say, do I believe him? Do I say, okay, that's how it's going to be? And to your point, maybe it's not there because it's just not possible. But I made the decision there and then that I was actually going to continue to pursue it. And I get some of my best ideas when I'm running or I'm in the shower. I don't know why. I think those are probably when I'm having some kind of...
the exact same thing. When I'm at the gym or in the shower, those are like and maybe going for a walk. That's like when my brain turns on.
I completely agree. I mean, active meditation is a thing. You don't just have to sit down and get all zen with your wind chimes. You can actually do it 100% in the shower or taking a good run. And in one of those moments, I said, how do I create something that doesn't need the FSB to sign off on it? Not that I'm trying to avoid them. I'd gone to them and they looked at me and said, "No, not possible." So how do I do it without them? And that was when we came up with the idea of actually making education savings a commodity. So instead of being a savings account where you put rand in it, now you buy edu time. So you're actually buying a product. And so you're going to get those roadblocks. And I think one of people who thrive in the startup space have to thrive in problem solving. Really have to understand that you're going to get all of these roadblocks. I keep going back to Uber and to Airbnb, and I wonder what it must have been like in their formative years. It must have been hard. It seems like such a simple idea. Of course, there's an app where you can type in one number, put a credit card, and 2 minutes later, you're going to get a taxi that'll pick you up. That makes so much sense now. But before that was here, can you imagine the kind of challenges? How many people said no to what they were doing? And I keep going back to that when I need, a little bit more comfort that I need to just carry on. But to that point, there has to come a point where you say, right, okay, now I've invested a year or a year and a half into this. And if by X date, the door doesn't open, then I need to find another door.
Gotcha. Yeah, I saw something funny on Facebook last week. It was like, I can't remember. It said something like 10 years ago, we were told, don't speak to strangers and don't get into strangers' cars. And now we speak to strangers so that they can come and we get in their car.
In their car. And then we go and stay in strangers' homes, right?
Dakin, I do want to get onto Kinfundi and the whole concept of what you've started up, because I do love it. But I was just wondering, you touched on, people who thrive in this are problem solvers, but I was wondering, is a startup a viable option for everyone? And, yes or no? And if so, what tips do you have for people thinking of going down this route or things they need to watch out for?
Yeah, I think the reality of the work landscape now is so different to what it was 20, 30 years ago. Our parents struggle to really relate to this idea that I have 3 different careers right now. Yes, I have the startup and yes, I'm doing Kinfundi, but I'm in New York and I'm teaching some workshops in New Orleans next week and Atlanta the week after that. I do some consulting on the side. So we're in an era where it's exciting actually. I would say expected, but it's not expected, but it's not unexpected for people to have 4 or 5 different things going on. And certainly I'm built like that. I enjoy the fact that, there are these multiple areas that are being pushed forward, and some of them might work, some of them might have to be shut down as you go along. The traction doesn't always happen where you think it will. And also coming back to this point where I said water eventually finds its level. I mean, I didn't ever sit down and look at myself and say, okay, Dakin, you are now going to start a startup. In fact, I didn't realize I had a startup until I was on television 2 weeks ago, and a friend called me and said, my friend, you have a startup that is so hip. I just never saw it like that.
It's kind of become a buzzword.
It has become a buzzword. And unfortunately, buzzwords, by their nature becoming buzzwords, also lose some of their energy. It becomes a bit of a cliche. So whether we call it startup or something else, I think, to your point earlier, actually, too, that not everybody is necessarily built for it. But if you are continuing to be unhappy or unfulfilled in your current work, then I think you should feel empowered to take whatever steps are necessary to get you out of that. And yes, that might lead you into the startup space. My half a step out of the corporate world was where I went to the company I was working for. I said, listen, I love what I'm doing, but I want to move back to South Africa. Can I consult and freelance for you from South Africa to the States? Now, I'd done a lot of thinking beforehand, and I'd actually put a strategy in play. I'd come to South Africa for a holiday, but had proven to them during the holiday that I could still work from South Africa, that our internet speed was adequate, and that I could join conference calls from Cape Town and Johannesburg.
How did you convince them of that?
Well, again, you do what you need to do. For the first year of being back in South Africa, I actually had a satellite dish on my house that I could get the strongest speed internet. It cost me 3,500 Rand a month. That was 3 years ago. But I knew that the American client that I had, which was paying me in dollars, would not have any patience for me saying, oh, can you please hold? I'm still waiting for this 2 megabyte file to download. That's just not in their realm. So you have to strategically think about this and put things in place. But my half step out of the corporate world was exactly that, to renegotiate my terms of engagement with an employer that knew me well, knew my work product, trusted me, and knew that the proposal I was making made sense and was workable, because I'd almost proved it to them without them knowing I was proving it to them. But then a point came where Kinfundi was just getting so big and so all-consuming that I wasn't able to give it its attention, because I kept having to sit on conference calls at 9 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning with my American clients, that I actually then had to work with them and say, guys, can we work on an exit plan? How about 3 months? Is that enough time? This is how I'm going to hand over my work. And then slowly but surely, I found myself kind of completely out of the corporate space. And I've never been happier, to be honest.
I love it. So I do want to get into that now. When I was still working in the corporate world, and even, more recently than that, I've often thought about, how much should I be saving for my child's education one day? How am I going to do that? What does that look like? And I think that's exactly what you guys do now. So time for some shameless self-promotion, some plugging. Tell us a bit about the startup that you've started and what it's all about.
Sure. So when I was sitting in my flat in New York, and I was Skyping with my family, who lived at that time on a farm in the Northwest, my mom called our domestic worker over to the Skype screen and said, say hi to Dakin. And now Norsi had been with us for 35 years. She's still with our family. And she was so flabbergasted, obviously, this technology where she could look basically at me 7,000 miles away in real time talking. She was really blown away. But the thing that she said next basically changed my life. She said, I wish my daughter could clean that flat. And we had a bit of a laugh at the time. It was a very old South African idea, that her highest ambition was that her family could stay aligned with our family. But I ended that Skype conversation, and I was very, very ruffled by that sentiment. I was very unsettled. And I said, this is, that was, I guess, 5 or 6 years ago now. We're very much into our new South African chapter. Her daughter should technically be able to be anything she wants to be.
Oh man,
there are enough government programs. There are enough anything to focus on helping her daughter leave this dusty farm in the middle of the Northwest and go and pursue her dreams. But for some reason, she hadn't. And so I had just sold a house, my first house actually, and I'd made a chunk of change on it. And I put that change into bank accounts for Norsi and for our other domestic worker, Anna. And I met with them and I said, this is for your kids, but it has to be spent on education. You tell me where you want them to go, and I will pay the schools directly. And Anna's son, Shai, wanted to do a business diploma. And so we found a business school for him, a little community college in Lichtenberg. It was 3,000 Rand. It was really not a massive chunk of money, but he went and he spent a year doing this business diploma. And he now owns a bakery in Mahikeng. He drives a car. He's not a financial burden. In fact, he supports his mom now a little bit, who's lives close to him. And I just thought, so that was the idea. And then my chartered accountant brain kicked in and said, well, how do I make this more widespread? How can we create a platform, for people to do this? What is in it for the employer? What is in it for the employee? What are the features that we need to get people to sign up? And so, that started the process. And 3 years ago, next month was when I moved back to Cape Town to pursue this. And, it started off as something that was very much focused on domestic workers, because that was where the idea came from. But thanks to my advisor board and thanks to the various inputs, we realized that actually we've got to get to scale. Critical scale is very important in this kind of business. And so really we should be targeting big employers, the Simbanya Golds, who employ 44,000 miners. A lot of the retail outlets that have staff on their retail floors that really could benefit from something like this. And I also naively came in with the idea that just because I felt like that, in other words, I felt some kind of responsible citizenry about educating other people, doesn't mean that corporates and employers would either. There's got to be something more in it for them. And so we spent a lot of time trying to understand what some of those features would be. And we've built in Black economic empowerment points. We know that companies are really struggling to get to, their higher levels, level 1 or 2, and that skills development is a critical part of this. So we spent a lot of time with experts in that field, just figuring out how to design it so that this type of bursary would qualify as skills development for companies that participated, how we can make sure that it's tax friendly, both for the employee and the employer. And so that's why, it didn't only take the 1 year I thought it would. It's taken 3 years. But we've actually, on Youth Day, this past month, June 16th, we finally launched Kinfundi out to the public. We have our first employers signed up. We're receiving monthly contributions into the accounts of their employees. And, it was amazing. I was working with our tech developer looking at the back end. So because we have proprietary software that we've built that administers the accounts at the member level. So, you can actually go in obviously and see how much each employee has in their account. And when I looked at those numbers on the screen and you see the person's name and ID number and then the balance on their account, it just suddenly struck me that it wasn't just a number. That number represented to a parent some sense of security that the future is starting to be taken care of. There was some relief in those digits that, it wasn't why I did it per se up front, but it really made it so worthwhile when I saw that. I must admit I had a bit of a moment when I was looking at, wow, we're here. We're finally here.
And well deserved. I mean, geez.
Thank you.
So Dakin, just so I understand correctly, it's basically then like a preservation or a provident fund for education. So employees never see that money. It goes straight into the fund, but it's to be used strictly for education rather than retirement savings, basically.
Yep, that's it in a nutshell. It's exactly like a provident fund in that employers and employees can contribute together. We don't say that either of them have to. We say that a minimum of 150 Rand per participating employee needs to come into that employee's account. And that the employee's contribution has to be via payroll deduction. So in other words, the company, when they do their monthly payroll, will just take off a payroll deduction in the same way that they do things like a loan repayment or a trade union fee. They would just take that deduction off their payroll. They would add their own contribution if the company was financially participating, and they would write out one check for their entire staff to us. We would then administer that. We would allocate it to the various employees' accounts. We invest that money. We share as much of the growth as we possibly can back with the members, so their money does grow. But we also work with donors and foundations and corporate social responsibility departments to locate additional funding. Big banks, for example, have a focus on education. They really obviously believe that it's the way forward. And so our value proposition to a big donor is that every single cent you give us, we will share with our members so that 100 cents of every rand goes to its mission. A lot of NGOs struggle to do that because they have their own overhead. They, 20 to 40 cents in the rand can be spent just trying to staff the office to support the programs that they have. I'm not bashing NGOs at all. That makes complete sense to me. But our value proposition is slightly different. And so we want to unlock as many possible inflows of funds to the working family in South Africa, because without that, they don't have a chance to save for the very, very high education fees, especially at the tertiary level. Look, we'll pay for any level of primary, high school, and tertiary, so long as the educational institution is registered with the South African Qualifications Authority. And so if they're registered there, they're good enough for us. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and then you guys pay the educational institutions yourself, so that the employee never sees that money, but it goes straight to the university or the college or whatever it may be.
Correct. They'll see that on their statements. They'll get a quarterly statement. They'll see the balance of EduTime. So, how many EduTime points they have in their accounts. But you're absolutely right. We, part of this feature, or the product features, is that it is guaranteed that the money will be spent on education. And the only way you can guarantee that is by making the payments ourselves. So it never gets cashed out into somebody's bank account.
So that money is safe. It's once it's in there, it's going to education.
Exactly.
I love it. This obviously works well for standard employment. If someone is self-employed or an entrepreneur, or they have a startup of their own, how will it work for someone in that sort of situation?
It's an excellent question. And, we do get that question quite a lot. I think South Africa is very entrepreneurial, and you have a lot of people that are in their own business. That's absolutely fine. The requirement is that it still gets made from the company, right? So if I'm my own startup, or if I have my own PTY Limited, my PTY Limited needs to make those payments. Okay. And if I'm one-man show, the only difference is then that I am technically registering as the employer and the employee, and I carry full responsibility for the minimums, which are the 150 Rand a month, for example. Okay. So it's absolutely possible for self-employed, even for contractors. We were dealing with a woman who, spends 6 months here and spends 3 months there. Ideally, we would still like that to come through payroll for her company, because they could unlock additional money. And so her employer could say, well, I'll add some myself. But if you are self-employed, it can come through your own company to us.
Gotcha. All right. Let me get back then. If people are listening to this and they want to find out more about you or Kinfundi, and I think it's such a great initiative, where can they get hold of you and find out more about the company as well?
Absolutely. So our website, www.kinfundi.com, is really the first place that has email addresses on that, which is great. Just quickly, the name Kin is next of kin. So that's where it's, it's not just your family. And Fundi is from Umfundi, which is, learner, scholar, education. All right. So Kinfundi is kind of a made up word from those two ideas. It's about education for more than just your family. It's your entire kin. My email address is Dakin, Dakin @kinfundi.com. And we have our Facebook page, which is up. We have our Twitter page, our Instagram page. It's all there. And I would gladly field any questions from any of your listeners around, advice, startup. Maybe they're in that dark night of the soul, wondering whether this is something they need to pursue or not. Very happy to feel that closet teacher in me really loves switching the lights on in other people too. And so I'm very happy to feel that.
Yeah, I'm going to be name dropping like crazy with this. I think it's such a cool idea and so important as well. And I'll have a link to all those places and the social media accounts and all that good stuff in the show notes, which will be at briantier.com/020. And Dakin, before I get to the final question, I just want to acknowledge you for coming on today and sharing a bit about your story and some tips for people thinking of startups. But more importantly, the sort of mission that you're on with Kinfundi. I've often myself driven, you drive along the highway and see kids playing on the township sort of soccer fields and just next to the highway. And I often think, like, these kids have the potential to be anything they want one day, yet most of them are just limited to the options of sort of domestic worker and perhaps gardener, when really they can be anything they want. So I want to acknowledge you for recognizing that too, and not just stopping at that, but actually making it a mission to change that and empowering more young people in our country. And
thank you.
The final question that I do have is, what one action can listeners take this week to start creating their own quarter life comeback?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I'm a big fan of treating fear with the right antidotes. And the first one is curiosity, getting into a curious mindset versus a fearful one. It's amazing just the change in energy when you say, well, instead of like, holy heck, what is going to happen if I do this? You go into the mindset of, I'm so curious. I wonder what would happen if I take this action. That really I find is helpful, and that's more of a long-term kind of strategy or philosophy that I live by. But the other one for kind of overwhelming senses of fear is just to make lists. I'm a big list guy. The moment I feel like my brain is exploding with the things I need to do, I get a piece of paper and I write down a list of the things I need to do. And it's surprising how short that list ends up being compared to what it feels in your brain before you've actually taken the time to write it down. And then I think just get, deeply honest with yourself. Some of the things that people like you and people like me do seems very sexy on the outside. Oh, great, so you're on TV. Oh, great, you're on this podcast. But is that really what you are attracted to? Are you maybe built in a way that's a little bit less risk averse? You prefer to know that you are paying into a provident fund through your corporate employer every month for the next 20 years. That's absolutely fine too. Yeah. I think it's just an honest self-appraisal. And I think that you can do in a week. You can sit down with yourself and say, what is it that I deeply, deeply want? Because I tell you, this podcast and my television appearance last week are two very short moments in 3 years of trudging, trudging. Like having people tell you what you're doing, you can't.
It's like 10 years to the overnight success, that type of thing.
Yes, absolutely. But if you do decide that you want to make a change and that the present reality is untenable for whatever reason, I think it's important to find out what those reasons are, and then to slowly start turning the ship. Slowly. You don't turn the Titanic around, in one swoop. You actually slowly make it a little bit of a nudge, a little bit more of a nudge. And next thing, 3 years later, which is really not a long period of time, you rub your eyes out and the reality that you find yourself in is vastly, vastly different from where you were before.
I love it. Dakin Parker, thanks so much for coming on the Quarter Life Comeback.
Brian, it's been fantastic to be with you. Thank you so much.
There you have it, guys. That wraps up episode 20 of the Quarter Life Comeback podcast. And just another big thanks to Dakin for coming on the show today and sharing what he knows about the startup world. If you like this episode, or who's someone who could benefit from it, make sure you share it on social media and shoot me a tweet at Brian Tier and let me know what you thought. As always, you can get the links and resources we mentioned in the show at briantier.com/020. And until next week, keep creating your quarter life comeback.
Thanks for listening to the Quarter Life Comeback. Get started today by visiting briantier.com.